Greetings and salutations. Hope everyone is having a low-key, subtle, vibey Monday evening. Greetings and salutations. I always forget to mute that. All right, let me know when you can hear me. Dari is saying hi, Wolfgang and Hunter. Hello, Christina. Hello, Melissa. Meow. Hello, Claire Bear. Wonderful. Lovely. It looks like things are up and running as they should. Well, I'm going to start this evening with an opening of poetry. Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats by T.S. Eliot. If you missed the preamble on what this is before, the world-famous Broadway musical Cats was, of course, based on T.S. Eliot's book of poetry. Justin Cook, all right. Ruth Sanchez is learning guitar. That's lovely. Good evening, Michelle Vanderpool and Kathy B, of course. Lovely. Wolfgang. Wolfus. I'll tell him when he wakes up. Well, Wolfus, Mama loves you. Just so you know. Passing the message. He is definitely having the sedate, low-key Monday evening that I wished for everyone else. Good, Meg is here. So yeah, there's to relieve any ambiguity in the chat. In the lower right-hand corner, there's 4 letters. They say save. If you click that, this will it will save this show to watch later. You can also start other playlists, but it counts for something very significant in the YouTube algorithm if you save this to any playlist at all. So I've recently been told. And while we're at it, it looks like everyone here is clicked a little thumbs up. But if you also click share and share this out to Facebook or wherever you are hooked up, that will help extraordinarily. Okay, so from T.S. Eliot, Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. I want to start with this one. I had a wonderful cat when I was in high school named Jenny. This poem is called The Old Gumby Cat by T.S. Eliot. I have a Gumby cat in mind. Her name is Jenny Anydots. Her coat is of the tabby kind, with tiger stripes and leopard spots. All day she sits upon the chair, or on the steps, or on the mat. She sits and sits and sits and sits, and that's what makes a Gumby cat. But when the day's hustle and bustle is done, then the Gumby cat's work is but hardly begun. And when all the family is in bed and asleep, she tucks up her skirts to the basement to creep. She's deeply concerned with the ways of the mice. Their behavior's not good and their manners not nice. So when she has got them lined up on the matting, she teaches them music, crocheting, and tatting. I have a Gumby cat in mind. Her name is Jenny Anydots. Her equal would be hard to find. She likes the warm and sunny spots. All day she sits beside the hearth, or on the bed, or on my hat. She sits and sits and sits and sits, and that's what makes a Gumby cat. But when the day's hustle and bustle is done, then the Gumby cat's work is but hardly begun, and she finds that the mice will not ever keep quiet. She is sure it is due to irregular diet, and believing that nothing is done without trying, she sets right to work with her baking and frying. She makes them a mouse cake of bread and dried peas, and a beautiful fry of lean bacon and cheese. I have a Gumby cat in mind. Her name is Jenny Anydots. The curtain cord she likes to wind and tie it into sailor knots. She sits upon the windowsill or anything that's smooth and flat. She sits and sits and sits and sits, and that's what makes a Gumby cat. But when the day's hustle and bustle is done, then the Gumby cat's work is but hardly begun. She thinks that the cockroaches just need employment to prevent them from idle and wanton destroyment. So she's formed, from that lot of disorderly louts, a troop of well-disciplined, helpful Boy Scouts with a purpose in life and a good deed to do. And she's even created a Beatles tattoo. So, for old Gumby cats, let us now give 3 cheers on whom well-ordered households depend, it appears. This next story, I think we'll continue with a little bit of H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells' most well-known work, as far as I'm aware, of course, is The Time Machine. And he also did a lot of short stories. There is a series on Amazon Prime that you can watch right now. It's a short series. I think there are only 4 episodes, and they are all half-hour presentations of H.G. Wells' short stories made into like 30-minute play movie sorts of things. This, however, was not among them. This one that I'm going to read to you now actually came to my mind because of an episode of Rick and Morty, the best science fiction currently on television. This short story, I believe, was published in 1903. This is called The Magic Shop by H.G. Wells. I'd seen the magic shop from afar several times. I had passed it once or twice, a shop of alluring little objects, magic balls, magic hens, wonderful cones, ventriloquist dolls, the material of the basket trick, packs of cards that looked all right, and all that sort of thing. But never had I thought of going in until one day, almost without warning, Gip hauled me by my finger right up to the window and so conducted himself that there was nothing for it but to take him in. I had not thought the place was there, to tell the truth, a modest-sized frontage in Regent Street between the picture shop and the place where the chicks run about just out of patent incubators. But there it was, sure enough. I had fancied it was down nearer the circus or round the corner in Oxford Street or even in Holborn, but always over the way, and just a little inaccessible it had been, with something of the mirage of its position. But here it was, now, quite indisputably, and the fat end of Gip's pointing finger made a noise upon the glass. "If I was rich," said Gip, dabbing a finger at the disappearing egg, "I'd buy myself that, and that," which was the crying baby, very human, "and that," which was a mystery and called, so a neat card asserted, "Buy one and astonish your friends." "Anything," said Gip, "will disappear under one of those cones. I've read about it in a book." "And there, Dada, is the vanishing halfpenny, only they've put it this way up so as we can't see how it done." Gip, dear boy, inherits his mother's breeding, and he did not propose to enter the shop or worry in any way, only, quite unconsciously, he lugged my finger doorward, and he made his interest clear. It's not that scary a story. Did you have a nightmare already? What's up? We're just getting started. Oh yeah, by the way, Mama loves you. Told me to tell you. "That," he said, and pointed to the magic bottle. "If you had that," I said, at which promising inquiry he looked up with suddenly radiance. "I could show it to Jessie," he said, thoughtful as ever of others. "It's less than 100 days to your birthday, Gibbles," I said, and laid my hand on the door handle. Gip made no answer, but his grip tightened on my finger, and so we came into the shop. It was no common shop, this. It was a magic shop. And all the prancing precedence Gip would have taken in manner of mere toys was wanting. He left the burthen of the conversation to me. It was a little narrow shop, not very well lit, and the doorbell pinged again with a plaintive note as we closed it behind us. For a moment or so, we were alone and could glance about us. There was a tiger in papier-mâché on the glass case that covered the low counter, a grave, kind-eyed tiger that waggled his head in a methodical manner. There were several crystal spheres, a china hand holding magic cards, a stock of magic fish bowls in various sizes, and an immodest magic hat that shamelessly displayed its springs. On the floor were magic mirrors. One to draw you out long and thin, one to swell your head and vanish your legs, and one to make you short and fat like a draft. And while we were laughing at all of these, the shopman, I suppose, came in. At any rate, there he was behind the counter. A curious, sallow, dark man with one ear larger than the other and a chin like the toe cap of a boot. "What can we have the pleasure?" he said, spreading his long magic fingers on the glass case. And so, with a start, we were aware of him. "I want," I said, "to buy my little boy a few simple tricks." "Let you demand?" he asked. "Mechanical? Domestic?" "Anything amusing?" said I. "Ah," said the shopman, and scratched his head for a moment as if thinking. Then, quite distinctly, he drew from his head a glass ball. "Something in this way," he said, and held it out. The action was unexpected. I'd seen the trick done at entertainments endless times before. It's part of the common stock of conjurers, but I had not expected it here. "That's good," I said with a laugh. "Isn't it?" said the shopman. Gip stretched out his disengaged hand to take this object and found merely a blank palm. "It's in your pocket," said the shopman. And there it was. How much will that be? I asked. We make no charge for glass balls, said the shopman politely. We get them, he picked one out of his elbow as he spoke, free. He produced another from the back of his neck and laid it beside its predecessor on the counter. Gip regarded his glass ball sagely, then directed a look of inquiry at the two on the counter, and finally brought his round-eyed scrutiny to the shopman, who smiled. You may have those too, said the shopman, and, if you don't mind, one from my mouth. So. Gip counseled me mutely for a moment, then in profound silence put away the 4 balls, resumed my reassuring finger, and nerved himself for the next event. We get all our smaller tricks in that way, the shopman remarked. I laughed in the manner of one who subscribes to a jest. Instead of going to the wholesale shop, I said, of course, it's cheaper. In a way, the shopman said, though we pay in the end. But not so heavily as people suppose. Our larger tricks and our daily provisions and all the other things we want, we get out of that hat. And, you know, sir, if you'll excuse my saying it, there isn't a wholesale shop, not for genuine magic goods, sir. I don't know if you noticed our inscription, the genuine magic shop. He drew a business card from his cheek and handed it to me. Genuine, he said, with his finger on the word, and added, there is absolutely no deception, sir. He seems to be carrying out the joke pretty thoroughly, I thought. He turned to Gip with a smile of remarkable affability. You know, you are the right sort of boy. I was surprised at his knowing that because, in the interests of discipline, we keep it rather a secret even at home. But Gip received it in an unflinching silence, keeping a steadfast eye on him. It's only the right sort of boy gets through that doorway. And, as if by way of illustration, there came a rattling at the door, and a squeaking little voice could be faintly heard. Nah, I warn you, don't go in there. I want to go in there, Dad. I want to go in there. Yeah. And then the accents of a downtrodden parent urging consolations and propitiations. It's locked, Edward, he said. But it isn't, said I. It is, sir, said the shopman, always for that sort of child. And as he spoke, we had a glimpse of the other youngster, a little white face, pallid from sweet eating and oversepid food and distorted by evil passions, a ruthless little egotist, pawing at the enchanted pain. It's no good, sir, said the shopman, as I moved with my natural helpfulness doorward, and presently the spoilt child was carried off, howling. How do you manage that? I said, breathing a little more freely. Magic, said the shopman, with a careless wave of the hand. And behold, sparks of colored fire flew out of his fingers and vanished into the shadows of the shop. You were saying, he said, addressing himself to Gip, before you came in, that you would like one of our buy one and astonish your friends boxes. Gip, after a gallant effort, said, yeah, it's in your pocket. And leaning over the counter, he really had an extraordinarily long body. This amazing person produced the article in the customary conjurer's manner. "Paper," he said, and took a sheet out of the empty hat with the springs. "String." And behold, his mouth was a string box from which he drew an unending thread, which, when he had tied his parcel, he bit off, and it seemed to me he swallowed the ball of string. And then he lit a candle at the nose of one of the ventriloquist's dummies, stuck one of his fingers, which had become sealing wax red, into the flame, and so sealed the parcel. "Then there was the disappearing egg," he remarked, and produced one from within my coat breast and packed it, and also the crying baby, very human. I handed each parcel to Gip as it was ready, and he clasped them to his chest. He said very little, but his eyes were eloquent. The clutch of his arms was eloquent. He was the playground of unspeakable emotions. These, were real magics. Then, with a start, I discovered something moving about in my hat. Something soft and jumpy. I whipped it off, and a ruffled pigeon, no doubt a Confederate, dropped out and ran on the counter and went, I fancy, into a cardboard box behind the papier-mâché tiger. "Tut, tut," said the shopman, dexterously relieving me of my headdress. "Careless bird, and, as I live, nesting." He shook my hat and shook out into his extended hand 2 or 3 eggs, a large marble, a watch, about a half a dozen of the inevitable glass balls, and then crumpled, crinkled paper, more and more and more, talking all the time of the way in which people neglect to brush their hats inside as well as out, politely, of course, but with a certain personal application. "All sorts of things accumulate, sir. Not you, of course, in particular. Nearly every customer. Astonishing what they carry about with them." The crumpled paper rose and billowed on the counter, more and more and more, until he was nearly hidden from us, until he was altogether hidden, and still his voice went on and on. "We none of us know what the fair semblance of a human being may conceal, sir. Are we all then no better than brushed exteriors, whitened sepulchres?" His voice stopped, exactly like when you hit a neighbor's gramophone with a well-aimed brick. The same instant silence, and the rustle of the paper stopped, and everything was still. "Have you done with my hat?" I said after an interval. There was no answer. I stared at Gip, and Gip stared at me, and there were our distortions in the magic mirrors, looking very rum and grave and quiet. "I think we'll go now," I said. "Will you tell me how much all this comes to?" I say, I said, on a rather louder note, "I want the bill and my hat, please." It might have been a sniff from behind the paper pile. "Let's look behind the counter, Gip," I said. "He's making fun of us." I led Gip round the head-wagging tiger, and what do you think there was behind the counter? No one at all. Only my hat on the floor, and a common conjurer's lop-eared white rabbit lost in meditation and looking as stupid and crumpled as only a conjurer's rabbit can do. I resumed my hat, and the rabbit lolloped a lollop or so out of my way. "Dada?" said Gip in a guilty whisper. "What is it, Gip?" said I. "I do like this shop, Dada. So should I said to myself, if the counter wouldn't suddenly extend itself to shut off from the door. But I didn't call Gip's attention to that. "Pussy," he said with a hand out to the rabbit as it came lolloping past us. "Pussy, do Gip a magic!" And his eyes followed it as it squeezed through a door I had certainly not remarked a moment before. Then this door opened wider, and the man with one ear larger than the other appeared again. He was smiling still, but his eye met mine with something between amusement and defiance. "You'd like to see our showroom, sir," he said, with an innocent suavity. Gip tugged my finger forward. I glanced at the counter and met the shopman's eye again. I was beginning to think that the magic was just a little too genuine. "We haven't very much time," I said, but somehow we were inside the showroom before I could finish that. "All goods of the same quality," said the shopman, rubbing his flexible hands together. "And that is the best. Nothing in the place that isn't genuine magic and warranted thoroughly. Excuse me, sir." I felt him pull at something that clung to my coat sleeve, and then I saw he held a little wriggling red demon by the tail. The little creature bit and fought and tried to get at his hand, and in a moment he tossed it carelessly behind the counter. No doubt the thing was only an image of twisted India rubber, but for the moment... And his gesture was exactly that of a man who handles some petty, biting bit of vermin. I glanced at Gip, but Gip was looking at a magic rocking horse. I was glad he hadn't seen the thing. I said, in an undertone and indicating Gip and the red demon with my eyes, "You haven't many things like that about, have you?" "None of ours. Probably brought it with you," said the shopman, also in an undertone, with a more dazzling smile than ever. "Astonishing what people will carry about with them unawares." And then to Gip, "Do you see anything you fancy here?" There were many things that Gip fancied there. He turned to this astonishing tradesman with mingled confidence and respect. "Is that a magic sword?" he said. "A magic toy sword. It neither bends, breaks, nor cuts the fingers. It renders the bearer invincible in battle against anyone under 18. Half a crown to 7 6 according to size. These panoplies on cards are for juvenile knights errant and very useful. Shield of safety, sandals of swiftness, a helmet of invisibility." "Oh, Daddy!" gasped Gip. I tried to find out what they cost, but the shopman did not heed me. He had got Gip now. He had got him away from my finger. He had embarked upon the exposition of all of his confounded stock, and nothing was going to stop him. Presently I saw with a qualm of distrust and something very like jealousy that Gip had hold of this person's finger as usual as he has hold of mine. No doubt the fellow was interesting, I thought, and had an interesting faked a lot of stuff. Really, really good faked stuff. Still. I wandered after them, saying very little, but keeping an eye on this prestidigital fellow. After all, Gip was enjoying it. And no doubt, when the time came to go, we should be able to go quite easily. It was a long, rambling place, that showroom, a gallery broken up by stands and stalls and pillars with archways leading off to other departments, in which the queerest-looking assistants loafed and stared at one, and with perplexing mirrors and curtains. So perplexing, indeed, were these that I was presently unable to make out the door by which we had come in. The shopman showed Gip magic trains that ran without steam or clockwork, just as you set the signals, and then some very, very valuable boxes of soldiers that all came alive directly when you took off the lid and said, I myself haven't a very quick ear, and it was a tongue-twisting sound, but Gip, he had his mother's ear. He got it in no time. Bravo, said the shopman, putting the men back into the box unceremoniously and handing it to Gip. Now, said the shopman, and in a moment, Gip had made them all alive again. You'll take that box? Asked the shopman. We'll take that box, said I, unless you charge its full value, in which case it would need a trust magnate. Dear heart, no. And the shopman swept the little men back again, shut the lid, waved the box in the air, and there it was, in brown paper, tied up and with Gip's full name and address on the paper. The shopman laughed at my amazement. This is the genuine magic, he said. The real thing. It's a little too genuine for my taste, I said again. After that, he fell to showing Gip tricks, odd tricks, and still odder the way they were done. He explained them, and he turned them inside out, and there was the dear little chap nodding his busy bit of a head in the sagest manner. I did not attend as well as I might. Hey, presto, said the magic shopman, and then would come the clear, small, hey, presto of the boy. But I was distracted by other things. It was being borne in upon me just how tremendously run this place was. It was, so to speak, inundated by a sense of rumness. There was something a little rum about the fixtures even, about the ceiling, about the floor, about the casually distributed chairs. I had a queer feeling that whenever I wasn't looking at them straight, they went askew and moved about and played a noiseless puss in the corner behind my back. And the cornice had a serpentine design with masks. Masks altogether too expressive for proper plaster. Then, abruptly, my attention was caught by one of the odd-looking assistants. He was some way off and evidently unaware of my presence. I saw a sort of three-quarter length of him over a pile of toys and through an arch, and he was leaning against a pillar in an idle sort of way, doing the most horrid thing with his features. The particular horrid thing he did was with his nose. He did it just as though he was idle and wanted to amuse himself. First of all, it was a short, blobby nose. Then, suddenly, he shot it out like a telescope, and then out of it flew and became thinner and thinner until it was like a long, red, flexible whip. Like a thing in a nightmare it was. He flourished it about and flung it forth as a fly fisher flings his line. My instant thought was that Gip mustn't see. I turned about, and there was Gip, quite preoccupied with the shopman, and thinking no evil. They were whispering together and looking at me. Gip was standing on a little stool, and the shopman was holding a big sort of drum in his hand. Hide and seek, Dada! Cried Gip. You're he! And before I could do anything to prevent it, the shopman had clapped the big drum over him. I saw what was up directly. "Take that off," I cried. "This instant, you'll frighten the boy. Take it off." The shopman, with the unequal ears, did so without a word and held the big cylinder toward me to show its emptiness, and the little stool was vacant. In that instant, my boy had utterly disappeared. You know, perhaps, that sinister something that comes like a hand out of the unseen and grips your heart about. You know it takes your common self away and leaves you tense and deliberate, neither slow nor hasty, neither angry nor afraid. So it was with me. I came up to this grinning shopman and kicked his stool aside. "Stop this folly," I said. "Where's my boy?" "You see," he said, still displaying the drum's interior, "there's no deception." I put my hand out to grip him, and he eluded me by a dexterous movement. I snatched again, and he turned from me and pushed open a door to escape. "Stop!" I said, and he laughed, receding. I leapt after him into utter darkness. Thud. "Oi, Lord bless my heart, sir. I didn't see you coming, sir." I was in Regent Street, and I had collided with a decent-looking working man. And a yard away, perhaps, and looking a little perplexed with himself, was Gip. There was some sort of apology, and then Gip had turned and come to me with a bright little smile, as though for a moment he had missed me. And he was carrying 4 parcels in his arm. He secured immediate possession of my finger. For the second, I was rather at a loss. I stared round to see the door of the magic shop, and behold, it was not there. There was no door, no shop, nothing. Only the common pilaster between the shop where they sell pictures and the window with the small chicks. I did the only thing possible in that mental tumult. I walked straight to the curbstone and held up my umbrella for a cab. "Hansoms," said Gip in a note of accumulating exultation. I helped him in, recalled my address with an effort, and got in also. Something unusual proclaimed itself in my tailcoat pocket, and I felt and delivered a glass ball. With petulant expression, I flung it into the street. Gip said nothing. For a space, neither of us spoke. "Dada," said Gip at last. "That was a proper shop." I came round with that to the problem of just how the whole thing had seemed to him. He looked completely undamaged. So far, so good. He was neither scarred nor unhinged. He was simply tremendously satisfied with the afternoon's entertainment. And there, in his arms, were the 4 parcels. Confound it! What could be in them? I said, "Little boys can't go to shops like that every day." He received this with his usual stoicism, and for a moment I was sorry I was his father and not his mother, and so couldn't suddenly there, in public, in our hansom cab, kiss him. After all, I thought, the thing wasn't so very bad. But it was only when we opened the parcels that I really began to be reassured. 3 of them contained boxes of soldiers, quite ordinary lead soldiers, but of so good a quality as to make Gip altogether forget that originally these parcels had been magic tricks of the only genuine sort, and the fourth contained a kitten. A little living white kitten in excellent health and appetite and temper. I saw this unpacking with a sort of provisional relief. I hung about in the nursery for quite an unconscionable time. That happened 6 months ago. And now I'm beginning to believe it is all right. The kitten had only the magic natural to all kittens, and the soldiers seem as steady a company as any colonel could desire. And Gip? The intelligent parent will understand that I have to go cautiously with Gip. But I went so far as this one day. I said, "How would you like your soldiers to come alive, Gip, and march about by themselves?" "Mine do," said Gip. "I just have to say a word, I know, before I open the lid." "Then they march about alone." "Oh, quite, Dada. I shouldn't like 'em if they didn't do that." I displayed no unbecoming surprise, and since then I have taken occasion to drop in upon him once or twice unannounced when the soldiers were about, but so far I have never discovered them performing in anything like a magical manner. It's so difficult to tell. There's also a question of finance. I have an incurable habit of paying bills. I've been up and down Regent Street several times looking for that shop. I'm inclined to think, indeed, that in that matter honor is satisfied, and that, since Gip's name and address are also known to them, I may very well leave it to these people, whoever they may be, to send in their bill in their own time. Well, I was going to read a poem from A Light in the Attic next, but I don't even have to turn to it as this is still memorized from childhood and very brief. We've been caught by the quick digesting gick, and now we are dodging his teeth, and now we are resting in his small intestine, and now we're back out on the street. Quick Trip by Shel Silverstein. Monsters I've Met by Shel Silverstein. I met a ghost, but he didn't want my head. He only wanted to know the way to Denver. I met a devil, but he didn't want my soul. He only wanted to borrow my bike a while. I met a vampire, but he didn't want my blood. He only wanted 2 nickels for a dime. I keep meeting all the right people at all the wrong times. The Little Boy and the Old Man by Shel Silverstein. Said the little boy, "Sometimes I drop my spoon." Said the little old man, "I do that too." The little boy whispered, "I wet my pants." "I do that too," laughed the little old man. Said the little boy, "I often cry." The old man nodded. So do I. But worst of all, said the boy, it seems grown-ups don't pay attention to me. And he felt the warmth of a wrinkled old hand. I know what you mean, said the little old man. So I'd like to make the survey inquiry here, as I'm doing across platforms. This coming Thursday is both the day of the week for the Lovecast, as well as Thanksgiving. So, what would people like? Where, when can most people attend? I'm looking at potentially doing it a night early, doing it on Wednesday. We could do it Thursday at the regular time, 6 o'clock. Or we could do it Thursday night later on. Several people have suggested a number of times. Several people have suggested anywhere starting Thursday at 7 o'clock to as late as starting Thursday at 9 o'clock. So let me know. Let me know in the chat, but it's easiest for me to tabulate if you send me a private message, DM, text, smoke signals, however the kids communicate these days. I'm already seeing a few Thursdays weighing in. Okay, good to know. Yeah, like I say, please weigh in the chat and as a bonus in a private message to me. So, there was a really wonderful, very famous poet who was born in St. Louis, who I had the great honor of listening to speak. She gave a presentation. I'm trying to remember what year it was that I heard her speak, but Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou is probably best known for a poem called I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I stumbled upon a little thing of her biographically that I'd never known before. It just surprised the hell out of me. I had to print this up. At the age of 8, while living with her mother, Maya Angelou was raped by her mother's boyfriend, who was a man named Freeman. She told her brother, and her brother told the rest of the family. So Freeman was arrested, found guilty, but he only spent 1 day in jail. 4 days later, after his release, he was murdered, probably by Maya Angelou's uncles. And Maya became mute for almost 5 years. In her own words, much later in life, she said, I thought my voice killed him. I killed that man because I told his name. And then I thought I would never speak again because my voice would kill anyone. her biography states that it was during this period of silence that Maya Angelou developed an extraordinary memory. She also developed her love for books and literature and her ability to listen and observe the world around her. So, with that, this is a poem called Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may tread me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Because I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room? Just like the moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes? Shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries. Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide. Welling and swelling I bear in the tide, leaving behind the nights of terror and fear. I rise into a daybreak that's wondrously clear. I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. We will definitely be revisiting Maya Angelou in future Monday nights. I love that. Oh, wow. Wow. Okay. We're going to do one more short story. And this one is by Roald Dahl, who much more famously wrote Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Without any more preamble. He says as he adds more preamble and refills his tea. This is one of those perfect moments for Michelle to edit later. Hi, bud. Michelle, for anyone that's wondering whose name I'm dropping in there, Michelle Hoover is producing Fireside Tales with Wolfgang as a cable access show, probably starting at the beginning of January. And they will be 1 hour shows, probably on like late night cable access. This guy and we're going to have our own Wayne's World. There you go. Oh, Malika I bet you. Oh yeah, I bet you would love Maya Angelou in particular. Good. I'm glad you were here to hear that. Hello, darling. Yeah. Oof, Maya. So, Lamb to the Slaughter by Roald Dahl. The room was warm. The curtains were closed. The 2 table lamps were lit. On the cupboard behind her, there were 2 glasses and some drinks. Mary Maloney was waiting for her husband to come home from work. Now and again, she glanced at the clock, but without anxiety. She merely wanted to satisfy herself that each minute that went by made it nearer the time when he would come home. As she was bent over her sewing, she was curiously peaceful. This was her 6th month expecting a child. Her mouth and her eyes, with their new calm look, seemed larger and darker than before. When the clock said 10 minutes to 5, she began to listen, and a few moments later, punctually as always, she heard the car tires on the stones outside. The car door closing, footsteps passing the window, the key turning in the lock. She stood up and went forward to kiss him as he entered. "Hello, darling," she said. "Hello," he answered. She took his coat and hung it up. And she made the drinks, a strong one for him and a weak one for herself. She's 6 months pregnant and only having a little drink. It was okay back then. And soon she was back again in her chair with the sewing, and he was in the other chair holding the tall glass, rolling it gently so that the ice knocked musically against the side of the glass. For her, this was always a wonderful time of day. She knew he didn't want to speak much until the first drink was finished, and she was satisfied to sit quietly, enjoying his company after the long hours alone in the house. She loved the warmth that came out of him when they were alone together. She loved the shape of his mouth, and she especially liked the way he didn't complain about being tired. "Tired, darling?" "Yes," he sighed. "I'm thoroughly exhausted." And as he spoke, he did an unusual thing. He lifted his glass and drank it down in one swallow. Although there was still half of it left, he got up and went slowly to get himself another drink. "I'll get it," she cried, jumping up. "Sit down," he said. When he came back, she noticed that the new drink was a very strong one. She watched him as he began to drink. "I think it's a shame," she said, "that when someone's been a policeman as long as you have, he still has to walk around all day long." He didn't answer. "Darling," she said, "if you're too tired to eat out tonight as we had planned, I can fix you something. There's plenty of meat and stuff in the freezer." Her eyes waited for an answer, a smile, a nod, but he made no sign. "Anyway," she went on, "I'll get you some bread and cheese." "I don't want it," he said. She moved uneasily in her chair. "But you have to have supper. I can easily fix you something. I'd like to do it. We can have lamb. Anything you want. Anything's in the freezer." "Forget it," he said. "But darling, you have to eat." I'll do it anyway, and then you can have it or not, as you like. She stood up and placed her sewing on the table by the lamp. Sit down, he said. Just for a minute. Sit down. It wasn't until then that she began to get frightened. Go on, he said. Sit down. She lowered herself into the chair, watching him all the time with large, puzzled eyes. He had finished his second drink and was staring into the glass. Listen, he said, I've got something to tell you. What is it, darling? What's the matter? He became absolutely motionless, and he kept his head down. This is going to be a big shock to you, I'm afraid, he said. But I've thought about it a good deal, and I've decided that the only thing to do is to tell you immediately. And he told her. It didn't take long. 4, 5 minutes at the most. And she sat still through it all, watching him with puzzled horror. So there it is, he added. And I know it's a tough time to be telling you this, but there simply wasn't any other way. Of course, I'll give you money and see that you're taken care of, but there really shouldn't be any problem. I hope not, in any case. It wouldn't be very good for my job. Her first instinct was not to believe any of it. She thought that perhaps she'd imagined the whole thing. Perhaps if she acted as though she had not heard him, she would find out that none of it had ever happened. I'll fix some supper, she whispered. When she walked across the room, she couldn't feel her feet touching the floor. She couldn't feel anything except a slight sickness. She did everything without thinking. She went downstairs to the freezer and took hold of the first object she found. She lifted it out and looked at it. It was wrapped in paper. So she took off the paper and looked at it again. A leg of lamb. All right, then they would have lamb for supper. She carried it upstairs, held the thin end with both her hands. She went into the living room, saw him standing by the window with his back to her, and stopped. I've already told you, he said. Don't make supper for me. I'm going out. At that point, Mary Maloney simply walked up behind him and, without any pause, she swung the big frozen leg of lamb high in the air and brought it down as hard as she could on the back of his head. She might as well have hit him with a steel bar. She stepped back, waiting. And the strange thing was that he remained standing there for at least 4 or 5 seconds. Then he crashed onto the carpet. The violence of the crash, the noise, the small table overturning, helped to bring her out of the shock. She came out slowly, feeling cold and surprised, and she stood for a few minutes looking at the body, still holding the piece of meat tightly with both hands. All right, she told herself. So, I've killed him. It was extraordinary. Now, how clear her mind became all of a sudden. She began thinking very fast. As the wife of a detective, she knew what the punishment would be. It made no difference to her. In fact, it would be a relief. On the other hand, what about the baby? What were the laws about murderers with unborn children? Did they kill them both? Mother and child? Did they wait until the baby was born? What did they do? Mary Maloney didn't know, and she wasn't prepared to take a chance. She carried the meat into the kitchen, put it into a pan, turned on the oven, and put the pan inside. Then she washed her hands, ran upstairs, sat down in front of the mirror, fixed her makeup, and tried to smile. The smile was rather peculiar. She tried again. "Hello, Sam," she said brightly, aloud. The voice sounded peculiar, too. "I want some potatoes, Sam." "Yes. And perhaps a can of beans." That was better. Both the smile and the voice sounded better now. She practiced them several times more. Then she ran downstairs, took her coat, and went out the back door, through the garden, into the street. It wasn't 6 o'clock yet, and the lights were still on in the neighborhood grocery. "Hello, Sam," she said, brightly, smiling at the man in the shop. "Good evening, Mrs. Maloney. How are you?" "I want some potatoes, please, Sam." "Yes, and perhaps a can of beans, too." "Patrick's decided he's tired, and he doesn't want to eat out tonight," she told him. "We usually go out on Thursdays, you know, and now I don't have any vegetables in the house." "Then how about some meat, Miss Maloney?" asked the grocer. "No, I got meat, thanks. I got a nice leg of lamb from the freezer." "Do you want these potatoes, Mrs. Maloney?" "Oh, yes, they'll be fine. 2 pounds, please." "Anything else?" The grocer turned his head to one side, looking at her. "How about dessert?" "What are you going to give him for dessert? How about a nice piece of cake? I know he likes cake." "Perfect," she said. "He loves it." And when she had bought and paid for everything, she gave her brightest smile and said, "Thank you, Sam. Good night." And now, she told herself as she hurried back home, she was returning to her husband, and he was waiting for his supper. She had to cook it well and make it taste as good as possible because the poor man was tired. And if she found anything unusual or terrible when she got home, then it would be a shock, and she would have to react with grief and horror. Of course, she was not expecting to find anything unusual at home. She was just going home with the vegetables on Thursday evening to cook dinner for her husband. That's the way, she told herself. Do everything normally. Keep things absolutely natural, and there'll be no need for acting at all. As she entered the kitchen by the back door, she was quietly singing to herself. "Patrick," she cried, "how are you, darling?" She put the package on the table and went into the living room, and when she saw him lying there on the floor, it really was a shock. All the old love for him came back to her, and she ran over to him, knelt down beside him, and began to cry hard. It was easy. No acting necessary. A few minutes later, she got up and went to the phone. She knew the number of the police station, and when the man at the other end answered, she cried to him, "Quick! Come quickly! Patrick's dead!" "Who's speaking?" "Mrs. Maloney, Mrs. Patrick Maloney." You mean that Patrick's dead?" "I think so," she cried. He's lying on the floor, and I think he's dead." "We'll be there immediately," the man said. The car came very quickly, and when she opened the front door, 2 policemen walked in. She knew them both. She knew nearly all the men at the police station. She fell into Jack Noonan's arms, crying uncontrollably. He put her gently into a chair. "Is he dead?" she cried. "I'm afraid he is." "What happened?" In a few words, she told her story about going to the grocer and coming back when she found him on the floor. While she was crying and talking, Noonan had found some dried blood on the dead man's head. He hurried to the phone. Some other men began to arrive. A doctor, 2 detectives, a police photographer, and a man who knew about fingerprints. The detectives kept asking her a lot of questions. They always treated her kindly. She told them how she'd put the meat into the oven. It's there now. And how she had gone to the grocer's for vegetables, and how she came back to find him lying on the floor. The two detectives were exceptionally nice to her. They searched the house. Sometimes Jack Noonan spoke to her gently. He told her that her husband had been killed by a blow to the back of the head. They were looking for the weapon. The murderer might have taken it with him, but he might have thrown it away or hidden it. It's the old story, he said. Get the weapon, and you've got the murderer. Later, one of the detectives sat down beside her. Did she know, he asked, of anything in the house that could have been used as a weapon? Would she look around to see if anything was missing? The search went on. It began to get late. It was nearly 9 o'clock. The men searching the rooms were getting tired. Jack, she said, would you like a drink? You must be extremely tired. Well, he answered, it's not allowed by police rules, but since you're a friend. They stood around with drinks in their hands. The second drink she's having while pregnant. Not that that's the worst thing she's done this evening. The detectives were uncomfortable with her, and they tried to say cheering things to her. Jack Noonan walked into the kitchen, came out quickly, and said, look, Miss Maloney, did you know that your oven is still on and the meat's still inside? Oh, she said, so it is. I'd better go turn it off. She returned with tearful eyes. Would you do me a favor? Here you all are, all good friends of Patrick's, and you're helping to catch the man who's killed him. You must be very hungry by now, because it's long past your supper time, and I know that Patrick would never forgive me if I let you stay in the house without offering you anything to eat. Why don't you eat up the lamb in the oven? I wouldn't dream of it, Noonan said. Please, she begged. Personally, I couldn't eat a thing, but it'd be a favor to me if you ate it up. Then you can go on with your work. The detectives hesitated, but they were hungry, and in the end, they went into the kitchen and helped themselves to supper. The woman stayed where she was and listened to them through the open door. She could hear them speaking among themselves, and their voices were thick because their mouths were full of meat. Have some more, Charlie. No, we'd better not finish it. She wants us to finish it. She said we ought to eat it up. That's a big bar the murderer must have used to hit poor Patrick. The doctor says the back of his head was broken to pieces. That's why the weapon should be easy to find. Exactly what I say. Whoever did it, he can't carry a weapon that big around with him. Personally, I think the weapon is somewhere near the house. It's probably right under our noses. What do you think, Jack? And in the other room, Mary Maloney began to laugh. Well, yeah, but who's counting? Well, thank you very much for tuning in to Fireside Tales with Wolfgang, Volume 8. As per normal, I'm going to leave the chat going for a few more minutes so that everyone could say goodbye to everyone else in the chat. And please weigh in with your preferred time for this week's Lovecast. We can do sometime Wednesday, we could do Thursday at the normal time, 6 p.m., or we could do later Thursday night. Say in the chat. Say in a private message, but please say. Thank you very much for joining us. Look for tomorrow's new video on Hunter's acoustic cabin. It'll be out at 11 a.m. I will probably post a link when I go to bed after finishing the video at about sunrise. That link will become active at 11 a.m. If you try clicking on it before that, it'll give you some kind of error message, I believe. In any case, please like and share it. And if there's anyone watching who hasn't yet subscribed to Hunter's Acoustic Cabin, that would be marvelously appreciated. I love you all. And we will see you whenever this next Lovecast happens.